The most effective thing that you can do when something is going wrong is to try and describe the problem as simply as possible.
So how did you deal with that impossible-ish situation?
If you're a risk and compliance officer and you're in the early phases of your career, but a huge part of it is, do you have the courage to say the difficult thing? And do you have the courage to not be liked? And do you have the courage to be uncomfortable? If you can get comfortable being uncomfortable, then your job becomes a lot easier.
The whole point of being uncomfortable, that you have to go through that suffering.
You won't always win. Not every day is going to be a good day, and you might come back from that tussle and go, the bear won today. Interesting, in finance these days, we're seeing more chief risk officers move into chief executive officer positions because they are.
Hello everyone, welcome to the next episode of Transformation Reality TV, where we talk about human side of transformation, the real stories including the messy bits, the moments that make you wonder how we are all still standing. Today we have Aoife Mansfield in the house. Aoife is the founder and managing director of the Aithrú group. She helps financial services companies scale without breaking things. She spent over a decade doing incredible things in financial services, building control frameworks at challenger banks, leading teams at KPMG across banking and fintech. So far on this reality TV show, we've talked about data, automation, people, processes. What we haven't talked about is risk. And that's the lens we've been missing in this whole transformation journey. Aoife says risk management isn't about saying no. It's about figuring out how to do things safely. She works with leaders to turn risk into an actual advantage. And honestly, the thing I love most about Aoife is how much she makes me laugh, how much she cracks me up every single time we meet. Being in risk and keeping that sense of humor, now that's impressive, right? So let's hear from Aoife.
Thank you, Aoife, for being here today on Transformation Reality TV.
It's a pleasure to be here, Rajita. Thank you for inviting me to a conversation.
I am so excited to have this chat with you, especially because of your risk background. I think overall risk, even for me, there is such a resistance to the whole idea of risk and compliance, and they just seem to be, those things that you have to do, and you're sort of tedious. And so I'm interested in learning what your experience has been taking people through the transformation journey from the angle of risk and compliance. So I'm really, really excited about today.
You're doing a great job for branding for the excitement of a risk and compliance career, Rajita.
We still want people to watch this, right? After we said risk and compliance.
The great people that appear when a problem's gotten really out of control.
Yes, yes, exactly that. And I think that's what we want to bring to the table, right? Because some of these words are so, people don't know what that act even means, what risk and compliance even involves, right? So I've asked this question to other people, and I think I'm going to ask you again, because I think this is where we start sort of really getting into the nitty-gritties of it. So tell me the exact moment when you thought a particular transformation program that you were working on was not going well at all. And it was like, oh my God. What?
Do you know, there's one particular incident that jumps to mind. I think everybody, when you've lived a couple of decades in your career, everyone has had a few uh-oh moments. But I remember this particular moment because you just have that feeling in the pit of your stomach going, oh no. And the moment that hit, I was sitting alone on a trading floor in the middle of Bishopsgate, late one Monday evening, prepping for that week's committee meetings, right? And everybody knows the joys of that, wading through 1,000,001 pages of colouring in, right? And looking to understand what's the actual narrative here and what's this telling me. Now, at the time, I was working for an organisation that had a very large scale, what we would call a financial crime remediation programme, in practical language, what that really means is we had to fix a problem that was largely data driven, but related to the way that we were managing financial crime risk, right? We hadn't really done over the years what we should have, and we were now bridging that gap, right? And if you chat to any executive in banking, the last three words they want to hear are financial crime remediation,
Right.
right? That's like nightmare fuel territory.
Right.
So nobody, when you're talking about that program, wants to hear anything than, the Lego song. Everything is awesome. It's fine. It's under control. Okay. So you imagine me sat there, the lights are going off on various banks of desks, wading through what I need to do for the week. And I suddenly realized I'm looking through these pages that everything isn't awesome at all. Right? And we've got reporting coming through from different parts of the business, which is starting to tell a story that's actually of material concern. We're not going fast enough. We found another massive issue. And it's only part of the reason that I'm spotting this is because I've been in other committees with other parts of the bank and I'm starting to see a pattern here, right? So that's triggering this eureka / oh no moment. So then fast forward to the following day, we're in the meeting and everyone is expecting this to just be the beige vanilla, everything's fine, tick, progress is underway. And I come in there and it's tis the season at the moment, right? It's like we've gone from vanilla latte to pumpkin spice latte that someone's edged with cayenne, right? So I'm the person that has to sit there and go, okay, we need to talk about this. This isn't an item for noting. I want to raise the following and we need to discuss what we're going to do. And this sort of stuff, when you're talking about anything that's sort of regulatory change, people understandably, like, it brings out the fear part of the human psyche as well, right? We all want to do a good job. I've never met anybody that's sat there going, well, I'm a really senior executive in a bank and what I'd love to do is really enable financial crime or, other nefarious activities. But when you're looking at it through the lens of things you are personally accountable for, if someone comes to you and says, we need to change the way we're thinking about this, and you're the person that has to go to the regulator and have that conversation and front it, that feels really uncomfortable, right? So I'm sat in that meeting waiting for the bomb to go off because I've said this really scary thing over here is a lot scarier than we thought it was.
There are a few things coming to mind. One is, of course, in the moment, it is one of the biggest things that could happen. And I often wonder about, this idea of failures or things that are like, oh my God, kind of things. And I often wonder about them from a zooming out perspective. So all these years later, I always end up going back and saying, well, that had to happen somewhere. Like, we couldn't just have had a smooth ride because we couldn't have gotten where we did eventually without something, Yeah. What do you think about that?
Oh my God, I think you're so right. So the one thing, when I think about those kinds of moments, and specifically that one, sitting there, both in terms of the night before, then in the meeting, and what subsequently came to pass afterwards, which we can chat about in a minute, you sort of sit there with a few extra grey hairs and a few more years behind you and go, oh, mate, I see that was a really bad moment. Like, there's sometimes you can't dress things up, right? If it's quacking and it's got feathers,
Yes.
it's not a Labrador, right? So you do need to have those moments where you just say what it is.
Yes.
And I think that there can sometimes be that kind of, and I come back to the fear equation we were sort of chatting about earlier, but there can be that reluctance to really name the thing and talk about it in plain language. I think sometimes when things are going wrong, people kind of default into corporate speak, right? Which is
Yes.
more, it's like really acronym heavy.
Yes.
There's lots of letters that are knocking
Nobody
around.
really gets anything whatsoever.
Right? And I think there's a natural thing of like hiding behind that a little bit. But I think that the most effective thing that you can do when something is going wrong is to try and describe the problem as simply as possible, right? And because if everybody understands, yeah, then you've got a chance at fixing it,
Yeah,
right? If everyone's on this different page about
yeah,
what's even gone wrong in the first
yeah.
place, you know, good luck.
It's not something anybody wants, but it's something that we all need, it's
Yeah.
that. So you were talking about, I think, I'm going to ask you the question. Was there any one person that made this thing possible or impossible where, you thought, okay, that was, I mean, there are always many, many people involved, but some, there is a person that stands out because of either direction. Does anything come to mind?
Yeah, probably people on both sides of the equation, but we'll start with the super positive stuff. And actually, to be fair, the both sides is more really the imagined outcome versus the actual outcome is probably relevant too, right? So I was so worried about what the CEO was going to say, right? Because part of the role that I performed and others in the room is that we were there to be his eyes and ears. So we're supposed to be, you know, the canaries to a certain extent in the mine, spotting this stuff. Even like the earlier the better, because it's less of a challenging thing to then deal with. And I also knew that we had a regular regulatory catch up coming up in just a couple of days, where we were now going to be in a bit of a conundrum about, well, what were we going to say and how were we going to say it? Would always wish to be as transparent as possible, but you have to manage that in a sensible way that maintains confidence and is actually reflecting the maturity you're trying to bring to the discussion, which is we found something new and or we need to adjust our approach. So I was terrified of what was going to go down in that response, and was, you know, have you heard the expression getting hair dryered before? You know, the sort of the I really thought that I was about to be in for like a blow dry, right? Because it's never good news. It's like it's possibly one of the worst things I could have said in that committee, right? And you feel like the person holding the baby as well, even if it wasn't solely my baby. Um, but actually, and this is where that particular individual is like, it continues to be a standout in their field. That person understood risk, right, from a commercial perspective. And the whole point of the exercise that we were doing was to try and put something right, right? It was to make sure that
Yeah.
we weren't opening that organization up to additional risk.
Yes.
So because they came from that starting point, and don't get me wrong, it was not the happiest I've seen that individual in his life before or since. But it didn't start from a place of an explosion. It started from a place of wanting to understand. And that made it so much easier because nobody's going in there, you know, laughing about this not being a serious thing or trying to brush it under a carpet. You haven't got anybody going up to 90 either, right? So that there's a sort of the initial internal sigh of relief when he finally started speaking was pretty material, right? The uh-oh started, that kind of knot that you have in the pit of your stomach started to unfurl a little bit and feel like, okay, we've got this, we can do this. And that kind of, those creating that sort of culture around the management of risk is, I think, what sets incredible CEOs apart. And actually interesting in finance these days, we're seeing more, and I love this, chief risk officers move into chief executive officer positions because we are starting to see, I think, a different era of risk management where people are bringing that commercial lens because they have to be really good at their job. And we're seeing CEOs, whether they've come from that background or not, with a much more mature understanding of how you manage risk and why they should care, right? They see it as a differentiator. So that was probably I was really nervous. It turned out to be okay. And that person made my life so much easier. The people in the room that make it really challenging, right? So I think everybody has had those moments where you know that somebody is going to be latching on to the thing that you're saying, and you're almost kind of worrying, is there going to be sort of a gleeful response here of like, ah, this is the moment, right? And in a corporate environment, you're always dealing with and juggling interesting personalities, if we put it in that
Yes.
British way, right? So that sort of shade fraud of, aha, this time the risk and compliance person isn't the person telling me off. This time I get to tell them off, right? Now, We have to have open debate, and that's not a kind of a one-way exchange. And also, if you're a risk and compliance person that conceptualizes your role as telling people off, you're very lost, right? That needs a reset. But there is always that kind of, and particularly, we're going back a few years in this story, but particularly at that point in time, it's a challenging environment. We had a very, very ambitious set of goals. Our strategy was bananas, right? Like what we were trying to do was something that had not been done in the industry before. And you all have to be pulling together as a team for that to happen. And there's always an agenda, right? So just having an eye on kind of what was some of the reactions in the room and just trying to play it with as straight a bat as I possibly could.
Okay. So how did you deal with that impossible-ish situation?
So the transparency was huge, right? And obviously before, so sat there and doing my prep the night before in that dark office, being able to kind of pick the phone up and have the connections, send a few emails and catch people who were involved in different parts of this before the meeting when we were then starting to brief execs, making sure that it wasn't a complete surprise in the meeting either, that I'd shot a note to a couple of people to say, we're going to need to talk about this. I'll explain it fully, but these are the kinds of issues. It's understanding, like, I think that the better you are at stakeholder management, I think that all that really means is, can you put yourself in the shoes of the person who is hearing the thing, whether that's, instruction, warning, request, whatever, that you're saying? And do you understand what their inhibitors and their disinhibitors are to do that thing? What's motivating them to be aligned with you or not, right? So it's not necessarily about going, I'm going to drop a grenade of gargantuan proportions in a committee with no prior briefing. It's, I feel nervous, but I've done some digging to have a more articulate answer for the scale of the problem. I've started to scope out what some of the solutions are, and the really key decision makers in the room have had an initial heads up, not enough for them to start running around compounding the matter. So it's always a delicate balance, right? I'm sure you've seen that in real life. But just getting to a point where people can hear and can debate rather than just react. That makes
Yeah.
sense?
Did this incident ask of you anything personally, at a personal level?
I think it asked of me that my professional curiosity be a bit bigger and louder than the elephant in the room that people weren't really addressing, right? And particularly if you're a risk and compliance officer, and often this isn't about being super senior, right? This might be being a risk and compliance officer and you're in the early phases of your career. But a huge part of it is, do you have the courage to say the difficult thing? And do you have the courage to not be liked? And do you have the courage to be uncomfortable? Because if you can get, it's a well-worn phrase for a reason, but particularly in these scenarios, if you can get comfortable being uncomfortable, right, then your job becomes a lot easier. You are not there to be the person that everybody loves working with the most. You should absolutely be a brilliant colleague, but the primary function of your role is to keep the organization safe. Now, that doesn't mean getting confused and thinking that you've got to look at the sign over the building when you're coming in the front door and note that you're not, computer says no, I'm acting as the regulator, all of that kind of old school, frankly, nonsense at this stage. You need to be a critical friend, I think, is how I've heard it expressed. And I really love that phrase, because you've got to have the trust there that people listen to that challenge as well. If you're in a position where those challenges are just perceived as challenge for challenge's sake, like you've kind of already lost, right? So it's, how do you build those relationships that when the really hard moments happen and things feel crunchy, you've already got some buy-in.
True, but I don't think you knew all of that when you were like you. I think that's probably a reflection thing about building. What I'm hearing more about what you said there is the courage to be uncomfortable because you knew that what you're going to say is not going to be comfortable. I think it's that part, and I don't think everybody has that. I think it needs a little bit of um, confidence, maybe, or a personality.
Yeah, do you know what I think it is? I think you've got to live it a couple of times. I think you've got to physically experience the actual discomfort of
Yeah,
being sat
yeah.
in one of those meetings or in one of those conversations where you're going, I would rather be anywhere else on earth than here right now, right? But then there's the other part which comes with experience of having done that a couple of times then and getting used to it, which is like you get to choose how you respond to it, right? So something can be uncomfortable, but you can put the disco in discomfort, right? You can look at it as a necessary part of your job, and you can frame that in terms of a this is what being good at my job actually looks
This
like.
is so, I mean, this is golden, right? Because literally that's exactly what it did for you. What I
Yeah.
mean is that if every single moment before that moment where you were in an uncomfortable situation pretty much prepared you for that moment. And
Yeah.
I wish we all had that hindsight, foresight to think about moments like that in that lens. I think we wouldn't be that uncomfortable, but maybe that is the whole point of being uncomfortable, that you have to go through that suffering.
The
Yeah.
suffering is a great way to
Yes,
put it.
yes,
Rosita, I think it's a horribly aligned to the edge of growth,
yeah.
isn't it?
So now, if you look back at your, let's say, young self, 20
Yeah,
years back when you had started, what would be
yeah.
the one thing that you would tell yourself to do or not
Um,
to do?
to do or not to do. Okay. I think so. My dad has a really brilliant phrase, which I think he's been trying to kind of hard launch as a family motto for about, 60 years now. But his saying is some days the bear gets you, and some days you get the bear, right? And that basically means for him that you won't always win. Not every day is going to be a good day, and you might come back from that tussle and go, the bear won today,
Yeah,
right?
that is
But
so
it's
amazing.
but it's just having that resilience to go, today is just a day. It's not the defining everything of
Yes.
your career,
Yeah.
and there can be some absolutely massive uh-ohs that you have, and anybody that tells you that they've never made a mistake is lying to you, right? But it's how you recover, and it's what you do next defines you so much more
Yeah.
quite often than the mistake that was made in the first place.
Yes. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Aoife. This has been brilliant. Brilliant.
Lovely chatting to you. Thank you so much for having me,
Same
Rajita.
here. Same here.